Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Daily Dispatch. I'm Julie Roginski here with Michelle Kinney, and we have our wonderful military contributor, Lieutenant Colonel Jaclyn Urso, who's going to be joining us in a moment. But just to set the template for what we're talking about here, there is a breaking news story in the New York Times following up on the story that we discussed on the Mayday morning show the other day, talking about how the United States government did everything possible
Mm-hmm.
to cover up what they're doing with enemy combatants in their mind, though they have never ever specified that they're enemy combatants. And obviously, we're not in a military conflict with them. But the fishermen who are on the boat that they're accusing of being narco terrorists. What this New York Times breaking news story has just confirmed, and we know this if you watch the Mayday morning show, you already knew this,
Mm-hmm.
is that the Pentagon has been scrambling nonstop in order to ensure that nobody would ever have any evidence of what was going on. They specifically are repatriating any survivors of these boat strikes to their home countries because they don't want to bring them here to a court of law, because that would necessitate having to prove that what they are doing is legal.
Yep.
And we have Lieutenant Colonel Urso joining us. But before we do that, Michelle, I just want to talk about one thing.
Yeah.
They murdered, in my view, those two men who were clinging to the wreckage of a ship in September so that they would not have to either repatriate them and have witnesses and evidence of what was going on or arrest them. There was some talk in the New York Times story. Originally, they had said to the State Department they wanted to send them down to that horrible gulag
Yeah.
in El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
And the State Department apparently was horrified and said, no way. Like, why?
Yeah. What are you doing? Right.
What are you doing? Which is interesting. I don't know why they're sending some people to CCOT, but not others. But nevertheless, they were horrified at the suggestion of sending them to CCOT. So they decided to instead just repatriate them home. Now, if they were really narco terrorists who deserved to die and who were trafficking in narcotics, why are they being sent home?
Right.
We'll ask Jaclyn Urso that in a moment. Let's bring her in.
Let's bring in Jaclyn. Hello, Jaclyn. How are you today from sunny Miami? You're going to have a new mayor?
We have a new mayor. Congratulations.
We are. Thank you. It was a
Congrats.
very, very good day for the Democrats yesterday. I think
Yeah.
she won by over 15 points. So first time in about 30 years we've had a Democratic mayor. So very, very positive outlook on the 2026 elections.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
it is.
Yep. Hopefully Florida will go back to being the swing state that it always was and not the crazy MAGA state it has become. Jaclyn, I want to talk to you about this because there's no better person on earth to talk to about this. You are a former JAG officer and you know the law better than anybody else. Under either civilian or military law, is there any justification for what is happening either with these boat strikes or more specifically with survivors of these boat strikes who escaped death by just the luck of the draw and are now either being repatriated back to their home countries or being murdered in a follow-on strike by the United States military?
Now, let me just put it right out there, bottom line up front. I think we're talking about the first strike. A lot of people are talking about the second strike and saying the second strike is illegal. I want to back up and just say I think the first strike was a violation of U.S. domestic law and international law. I think it was an extrajudicial killing. And then I think the second strike was even more illegal and egregious and an extrajudicial killing in violation of both domestic and U.S. law, domestic law and international law. And then I think the subsequent handling of the detainees and the persons on the U.S. Iwo Jima, a ship that I was on actually personally for a while,
Oh, wow.
is an imprisonment without due process and illegal. I think it's an admonishment of U.S. law and international law, and I think we need to get down to the basics here. The U.S. is not currently in a validly defined or declared armed conflict. I think the executive branch is saying that we're in an armed conflict and that it's begun between the U.S. and the Caribbean cartels, but there's been no congressional approval or appropriations of funds to legally declare an armed conflict. I mean, where is it?
Right.
The Congress has acted in the past, and although there hasn't been a declared armed conflict since World War II, Congress has declared an authorization to use military force in the past after September 11th. Here, the executive branch has declared an armed conflict on Caribbean cartels and labeled them insurgents. And I don't think that they fit the definition of an insurgent. And Congress hasn't acted according to the War Powers Resolution Act of 1973, which is a federal law that is designed to limit president's authority and reinforces Congress's constitutional power to declare a war. So I'm going to pause right there and just say flat out, under U.S. domestic law, I don't think that we've reached the level of an armed conflict because Congress hasn't acted pursuant to the Constitution and U.S. federal law to authorize an armed conflict.
Now, I have seen Republican senators talking about the fact that this is all okay because Barack Obama at one point used his authority to use drones to kill American citizens with ISIS in Iraq. What's the difference?
Congress has provided the president, under the authorization to use military force against insurgents and terrorists based on September 11th, the authority to use military force against enemies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, under that authorization to use military force, we were in a declared armed conflict and a non-international armed conflict, and the laws of LOAC applied. Also, the rules of engagement applied, and under those, proportionality is one of the LOAC principles that needs to be applied, and it was analyzed under the LOAC principles, and based on the intelligence at the time, it was decided based on higher commands that the LOAC principles and the rules of engagement were satisfied, and drones were used to prosecute enemies of the United States based on the authorization of the use of military force that Congress has authorized after September 11th. So we were in a declared non-international armed conflict, and Congress had authorized the president to use military force against our enemies. The difference here is that Congress has not acted to provide the president the authority to use military force. And we're saying that these are terrorist organizations, but they don't necessarily fit under the definition of a terrorist organization. Now, we are still in a law enforcement paradigm where the Coast Guard is the one that has the authority to take action under Title 14. We are using Title 10 forces in a non-international, in a non-declared armed conflict. That's the difference. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
I mean, in a nutshell, Congress authorized the use of military force to go against ISIS and anybody in Iraq that the president deemed to be a threat to the United States. Congress has not authorized the president to do any such thing here in the Caribbean. Is that right?
That is correct.
So let me ask you this, because we had Melissa Corrigan on from Blue Amp, and if anybody hasn't read her incredible exclusive that the New York Times is now piggybacking on, I want everybody to do that, and I want to drop this in the chat so they can read it.
Yeah.
But Melissa Corrigan had this incredible article on Blue Amp that said that the U.S. Navy deleted all evidence of the October boat attack survivors. And so that they effectively covered the whole thing up. That you had people who were very junior on the ship saying to their superiors, do not do this. We believe this is a violation. What is their responsibility? Because I feel like if you are a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old who's just signed up to join the Navy, and you are saying to, I'm not sure what the rank is on the ship, that's the highest rank, whether it's an admiral or somebody below that, but you're saying to somebody much, much, much older and more powerful than you who can destroy your career in 2 seconds, sir, what you are doing is not legal. Is that their responsibility? I mean, are they legally obligated under the Uniform Code of Military Justice or under any other laws to do that? Or how does that work for them?
Yeah, I mean, even if we take the Trump administration's assertion at face value that we are in a non-international armed conflict, the U.S. domestic law and international law still applies, right? So under U.S. domestic law, there's the law of war manual, and it talks about 3 different types of classifications of people. There's civilians, there's unprivileged belligerents, and then there's combatants. Now, we're going to put combatants aside because those are people in uniform that take up arms on behalf of a state, like the United States military against, originally when we went into Iraq, against the Iraqi army. Right? We're not talking about those. We're talking about civilians and unprivileged belligerents. And if there's any doubt, these people are civilians.
Yeah.
You can only take up actions against civilians if they've lost their civilian status in some way and they've become unprivileged because they've taken up arms in some capacity with a hostile act or hostile intent, and we've positively identified them. Either way, the Geneva Conventions under Common Article 3 provides minimum humane treatment standards for all people in a non-international armed conflict. And then we've got the Law of War Manual that provides specific protections for civilians and for unprivileged belligerents. I'm going to pause right there to see if there's any questions before I go any further.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to play just a quick clip of it's unprivileged belligerents, right, Jaclyn? That's what the words are. It's funny because having no idea as a total muggle here, not knowing what that meant when I first heard belligerent, I mean, that has a different meaning in my mind. And I think of Pete Hegseth, belligerent, with totally different meaning. So this clears it up, at least for somebody like me who's trying to piece all of this together. And I just wanted to play a quick clip of Melissa Corrigan, who, was the original reporter to break the story. We had her on Monday. And we're reacting to that and also the New York Times follow-up. But I just want to play this really quick.
Only been on board for about 2 hours when the order came down, and the document does say that order came from the admiral, came down to delete the video footage. And to the credit of those enlisted servicemen and women on the ship, there was pushback. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of consulting, many different policies and protocols, and the standing, of course, Geneva Code and the international law on how these individuals should be treated. And ultimately, JAG came back and said that these individuals were going to be classified as unprivileged belligerents, which is a bit of a gray loophole in the Geneva Convention, in that those individuals do not get the protections afforded either civilians or POWs under the Geneva Convention. So this loophole has unfortunately been related to other instances that have embarrassed the U.S. military, like Guantanamo Bay. So that term carries a lot of history and it carries a lot of negative connotation. So what we're looking at now is who gave the order, because according to the Geneva Convention and standing U.S. code, for a detainee to be classified as a UB, there needs to be a tribunal. However informal, there needs to be a tribunal to designate that classification. And to our knowledge, any such tribunal did not happen. So what you're seeing here, like from your piece where you said Pete Hegseth, who understands the warrior ethos about as well as reality show contestants understand reality, the confusion that's swirling and muddying the top ranks of our military has clearly filtered down to the very bottom, where you have Marines and sailors literally arguing on the spot over whose protocol to follow and whose orders to follow. And this is an extremely dangerous and vulnerable moment for our military.
I mean, I have so many questions about this, but
yeah. So, I mean, I cannot imagine, Jaclyn, being on a ship in the middle of the ocean. And just so a lot of people in the comments, by the way, are asking about the cat. It's not my cat. I think it's Jaclyn. Is it Pumpkin? Yeah, Pumpkin's chatty today. Hi, Pumpkin. So I can't imagine that happening. And like as a lawyer, right, as a judge advocate working for the Marine Corps, which Jaclyn did for 20 years, and I live here with an attorney. Julie, you live with an attorney. When you're thinking about the client, right, you're trying to get to a yes, right? but your client is the American government. Your client is the United States of America. So like, are you trying to get to a yes, or are you trying to get to a no in like a protective stance first? Like if you're on that ship and you have an admiral or somebody saying to you like, let's delete this footage or whatever it is, like, are you trying to get to the yes to find a way for that to be legal, or are you just providing, facts, straight up? Like how would you, in that kind of situation, would you even approach that? Like I can't
Yeah.
imagine being in a situation like that.
The first questions I would ask is, what do you want to do and why do you want to do it? Right? Trying to get to the end state. What is the commander's objective here? And then based on that, I would then find the rule of law in which to navigate through to make sure I minimize the risk as much as possible.
Okay.
Now, sometimes the risk is, I would provide 1, 2, 3 different courses of action with the minimal amount of risk, the larger amount of risk, and then the highest amount of risk. And then I would say, I'd recommend, you take this course of action. I'd recommend you do this, and we minimize the risk by doing these things. Here's what the rule of law says. Now, the Geneva Conventions under Common Article 3, which is what would be applied here, because it's standards for all people in a non-international armed conflict, because we are not in conflict with a specific state, states that, humane treatment, we prohibit acts of murder and violence, right? We are not to take hostages.
Mm-hmm.
We are to have judicial guarantees of sentences and executions must follow fair trials. We are to care for the wounded and shipwrecked. And U.S. actions under the Geneva Conventions under Common Article 3, we are to ensure all wounded persons are treated equally. We are to maintain strict records for keeping and documenting to ensure all detained persons are treated appropriately. These are things under Common Article 3. Even if we're dealing with unprivileged belligerents, they still rate certain humane treatment standards.
Right.
Now, they don't rate as many humane treatment standards, protected status as civilians, right? But they still rate these certain humane treatment standards that everybody rates in the world,
Right.
according to the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions and other
Mhm.
international standards of international human law.
Right.
So we've ensured detained persons are treated appropriately. We've done this in Iraq and Afghanistan. After the initial push into Iraq and Saddam Hussein was captured and we're dealing with insurgents, I was there and I was running as a judge advocate for an artillery battalion that were posting as military police. And we were doing all of the detention operations in Al Anbar province, including the regional detention facilities. And we were trying to teach the Iraqis how to run jails. And so we processed all of the unprivileged belligerents, and it was called 5 S's and a T. And we would, tag them and we would process them. And this is a normal procedures that we would teach our Marines. And we would have standard operating procedures to do these things, to document them, to take pictures of them. When I was in Afghanistan, I actually was part of moving detainees from one place to another. And I was part of filling out the paperwork and taking pictures and treating them humanely and pushing them from one place to another to make sure that we've documented them correctly. So according to the Geneva Conventions, even if they are unprivileged belligerents, we're still required to treat them humanely and document them and keep a record. And then there's also the Law of War Manual, which requires us to do this as well. And I can go over those requirements, but I'll pause right there for a moment for questions.
But I guess, Jaclyn, the reason that we're not detaining them, the reason that we're not processing them, the reason that we're either murdering them or sending them back to their home countries is precisely because the Pentagon does not want to do what you're talking about. And the reason that I have to come back to that they don't want to do what they're talking about is because that would require justifying what they're doing with these detainees in the first place. In other words, when you were in Afghanistan, when you were in Iraq, you may believe, and as I do, I don't know if you do, but that we had no business being in Iraq, but nevertheless, Congress gave us the authorization to be in Iraq. And you were there under congressional authorization, and you were there under the rules of war. And therefore, anybody that you tagged was there because they were presumably legally, according at least to our Constitution and to our, to our military laws, they were tagged legally. Now, that's not the case for these detainees. In fact, I'm not sure that they know why these detainees would be detained. And therefore, because they don't know, they're just either erasing them from the face of this earth or just sending them back to their home countries. This is an insane way to conduct an operation, I would think. And I would think, as somebody who's dedicated her life to the military and who dedicated her life to military law, for you, this must be incredibly painful, because you are watching this, and this is, I mean, this is just extrajudicial. I don't, what are we doing here?
Yeah,
it is. We're violating international law. We're violating U.S. domestic law. I mean, the law of war manual states that we need to maintain strict records and documentation and of all detained persons, and we're not. And it also says that we need to maintain the detention of these people until hostilities are over, and we're not doing that. And why does it matter? It matters because documentation is the cornerstone of the legal framework designed to protect basic human rights during all conflicts and ensure accountability. Without it, the system of protections collapses. And there's risks to the detainee and the families. There's risks to the detaining power and the international community. And there's post-conflict risks. And, let's talk about the risks to all three of those different parties involved in something like a non-international armed conflict. Because it is a sad state of affairs when we are the United States of America and we were supposed to be the pinnacle of justice and integrity and freedom and liberty, and we are not following our own laws. And we are not the example of the shining city on the hill that I believe that we must be in this age of the world. We have lost our sense of what it means to be the free and democratic nation of the United States of America. And we need to do something about it. And I'm so thankful that we are here today and we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to add to one more thing before we go, because we promised that we wouldn't go too long today. But you have the chair, is it Mike Rogers?
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of the Armed Services Committee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just ended the investigation into the boat strikes.
Of course. Of course. There's no check on Donald Trump. There is no check because the Republicans control everything. They have the Supreme Court, they have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the executive branch, obviously, too. And it seems as though there is no check. And one of the things also that Melissa talked about on Monday that really sent a chill down my spine, and Jaclyn, I know you and I have talked about this for years, is how close we are to actual war. Again, it's just a matter of when, not if. And she drew several comparisons to the vulnerability of the ships, specifically the USS Cole, before September 11th. And what we learned from that, what we had learned from that, and the protections we put in place to prevent things like that from happening again. But unfortunately, I mean, look at what we're doing. I mean, it's the retaliation is going to, in what way? I don't know how that's going to happen. I mean, it certainly feels like something bad could happen, especially when the FBI is draining their resources to fight terrorism here in the United States and putting it towards, chasing immigrants or going after or sending a security detail for Kash Patel's girlfriend. But, what is in your experience, what are your spidey senses like in this moment? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think we're on the cusp. Actually, Michelle, we talked about this many moons ago, while I was still in the Marine Corps, and even as I was getting out, is that I think that we're kind of already on the ramp up of World War III. It's just that the U.S. hasn't kinetically entered into World War III, and it started in 2008 with with Russia invading Georgia, and then Russia invading Ukraine after that. I mean, some people may even say that it started in 2001 when the World Trade Centers went down. The World War III it could potentially have started maybe 20 years ago, and we're just really in the middle of it. And
and our idea of what a world war could be different this time, and maybe that's why we're not recognizing it, right?
Right.
Because before, we have this vision of our grandparents, heading overseas and there being some sort of war effort around the world, but this is very, very different now. We're dealing with surveillance and technology and drones, and it's a much different landscape now than it was.
And these violations, are risking to the detaining power, to the United States and the international community. It risks, us being liable for war crimes and legal violations. It risks the erosion of reciprocity. What happens when the United States service member gets captured? Now we're encouraging our enemies to engage in similar violations of international humanitarian law violations, right? Now we don't document. Right now, we leave the question open to people to claim that we've further harmed these people. There's human rights violations that can be alleged, even if we didn't, further harm them. We lose credibility in the eyes of the international community. This leads to diplomatic sanctions and international commendation. The post-conflict risks. Now we're missing people and they're unaccounted for, and now it's hard to find them. Also, how do we hold people accountable? Now it's challenging in the post-war proceeding phase and holding people accountable for war crimes and ensuring people are not unfairly accused of war crimes.
Yeah.
Right. And also these people are denied communications through the Red Cross, and it's a critical lifeline in the time of immense anguish and uncertainty. And they're vulnerable to extrajudicial actions like being disappeared. I mean, this is just the cusp of it, right? This is just the start of it. If we do this, are we opening up Pandora's box? What's going to happen the next time? Are they going to disappear? Are they going to be subject to violence? Is there existence of official knowledge of the detaining power? Next time, are we going to know about it? Next time, is the U.S. military going to be silenced so much that your reporter that knows of contacts inside the USS Iwo Jima, are they going to be able to come forward and provide the information? Are we going to be able to repatriate these people to the right country? Or are we going to send them to a gulag? It's like this double standard that we have now, that we're supposed to be the United States of America. We're supposed to be following the rule of law, but yet we are not holding ourselves accountable to that same rule of law that we're using supposedly, to enforce, the U.S.'s actions on the international community. It's this dichotomy. And then it goes down to, the young corporal or sailor on the deck trying to figure out, what are we doing here?
Right.
You've got Marines and sailors and soldiers and airmen that are enlisting, thinking that what they're raising their hand to support and defend the Constitution, and the orders that they're given are presumed lawful. But now it's coming down that more and more the orders are not lawful.
Right.
Now they're caught in a catch-22. And they violate it at their own peril, and they're put to the side, maybe put in the brig, and even at the end of the day, if those orders are deemed unlawful, they've already lost their career. So it's just a bad morale
for everyone.
Yeah, and I think the saddest part about this is that Congress, which has ultimate oversight over all of this, just basically said, and I quote, "It's done." This is what Representative Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee from Alabama, told reporters today, or on Tuesday, I should say. He said, "I've got all the answers I needed."
Jesus Christ.
That's it.
Meanwhile, Jim Himes, right?
By the way, this is the man who promised, and I quote, rigorous oversight of that boat strike on September 2nd last month.
No transparency whatsoever to the American people.
Well, we are talking to Jim Himes tomorrow. We'll have that podcast up shortly after that, in the next couple of days. But we were talking to Jim Himes about what he saw.
Yeah.
He's the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. And we will talk to him about what he saw in his briefing that he can tell us to describe those boat strikes. He said when he came out of there that it was one of the most awful things he's ever seen as a public servant. So we'll want to talk to him about that, and get some answers there.
Yeah.
But Jaclyn, thank you, because this is so important. Yeah.
I want to throw this up here. I'm going to put in the chat here. This is a gift article from my subscription to the New York Times. It's in the chat. So if you're in the chat right now, go in and paste that into your browser and take a look at this, because this confirms basically all of what Melissa told us on Monday, everything we're talking about here today, especially as it pertains to the survivors. Like, they don't want survivors because survivors equal witnesses. They don't want witnesses to their crimes. It's that simple. It really is.
Okay. Well, on that depressing note, Jaclyn, thank you. Yay.
But
Thank
Miami's good news today. So
Yes.
we can put that in our hat and walk
That's
into
right.
the world. You know?
Okay. We are probably, Jaclyn, going to have you on very soon again.
Yeah.
Because this stuff never ends. So thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Urso. And we are so deeply gratified and grateful to you that you're able to come and explain all of this to those of us who are muggles, as Michelle called us earlier, and don't know anything about this. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Daily Dispatch today, and we will see you back here tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern for the Mayday Morning Show. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.